Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and we spent the last few weeks going over ASP.NET Model View Controller, or MVC. I wanted to try to come together with some kind of ending project and show you very quickly what I did. I am taking courses out on udemy.com. Alright, and let's see, I think this is the course, so let's see. So I signed up for this course because this is one of many that I found. It's called ASP.NET MVC Project, etc. I'm going to let you hear the gentleman. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the guy. He really knows his stuff. But I just want you to hear, well, this is what it was.
Hello, my name is Vojislav, and I will be your instructor for this course. This course is a practical course for learning ASP.NET MVC5.
And what he said is true. It's a course on MVC5. The problem is I started to go through, he's got 70 lessons. It's about, I don't know, it must be about 17 hours worth of material, something like that. Maybe it's not that many, but it's somewhere around there. And I was on about lesson 13, and all of a sudden my code stopped working. So I went out to YouTube and I typed in ASP.NET MVC shopping cart project. And I looked, and there were a lot of them out there. Some of them, like this gentleman right here, if you wanted his code, you had to subscribe to his network and donate a minimum of $15. I didn't want to do that.
You're right.
Some of them were just hard to understand when I sat and listened to them. All right, and some of them I just didn't think were that good. So I went online. And there is a gentleman out here, and I probably cannot pronounce his name. Shivprasad Korala, let's just say, and Marla Sukesh. And he's got this thing, Learn MVC Project in 7 days, day 1. Well, this looked really good. In fact, I want to go over this in class, but it's part 1 of 7. Now, he has updated this. He wrote it back basically about 3 years ago, 2 to 3 years ago. But I'd like to go through at least part of it, not with you right now, but I'd like to. So then I thought, okay, well, what else is there? All right, so I went out to Microsoft's ASP.NET site, ASP.NET/MVC. And I looked at what was out there. And they've got a bunch of videos and a bunch of other stuff. All right, you can look at that if you want to, if you get a chance to, etc. So I started going through all this stuff. And I thought, wow, there really isn't what I consider to be a really good example in here of what I wanted to show you. So I looked at earlier versions. All right. And I went and I remember that years ago, I had gone through this. It's called MVC Music Tutorial. MVC3, so it's Model View Controller version 3, and there's 10 tutorials. All right, well, if I back up a bit, these are the 10 tutorials. So as you can see, it's how to create the MVC MusicStore application, a sample app that sells music albums online and implements administration, user sign-in, and shopping cart functionality. Well, after giving it some thought, what I thought was I'm going to go over all 10 of these lessons with you. Now, some of these we're going to go over very fast, like part 7, membership and authorization. Why would we go through that fast? Because the way that it was done in MVC3 is not at all the way that it's done anymore. Okay, so I have decided I'm going to go through this. It's either going to be pretty cool or it's going to be a flaming pile. All right, but we're going to do it and see what we get. So here goes. Going out to part 1. Oh, I should mention too that there is a tutorial that basically is pretty much everything that's in there. Some of the names are different, etc. I'm going to give everybody a copy of this tutorial. I'm actually going to give you a copy of the code. But we want it to work in MVC5 in an ideal world. So, as mentioned here, the MVC MusicStore tutorial is a tutorial app that introduces and explains step-by-step how to use ASP.NET MVC and Visual Studio for web development. The MusicStore is a lightweight sample store implementation, so the idea is it's not going to be huge. Because of that, there's not a lot of functionality to it, but there's some. It sells music albums online. Yeah, albums in many ways are making a comeback. And it implements basic administration, user sign-in, and shopping cart functionality. So there's 10 parts, as you can see they're right here, so I'm going to jump through all of them. By no means will I finish all 10 today, but if I get done with the first 2, 3, 4, that'd be great. So this tutorial details all of the steps taken to build this ASP.NET MVC Music Store sample app. Part 1 is an overview, and in it you actually create the project. Alright, notice what it says. We'll be starting slowly, so beginner level web development experience is okay. Well, you've got more than that. Maybe I should have tried going through this project first. Live and learn. Alright, so the project we'll be building is a simple music store. There are 3 parts to the application. There is a shopping cart part, which is good because I wanted us to be able to implement, even if it's simplistic, a shopping cart. Well, if you have a shopping cart, you need to be able to check out. And we need some way that we're able to administer this. In other words, the only people who should be able to add music or delete music or modify music should be an administrator. So yeah, it'll look something like this. Little dorky, but as it says here, users will be able to browse albums by genre. We won't take the time to actually put in all these pictures of albums. That would be ridiculous. You can view a single album and add it to your cart. I do want you to know that, yes, it'll add it to your cart, but rather than a cost, the way that this has been implemented is everything's free at this music store. All right, just so you know that. You can review your cart and remove any items from it that you don't want. So, for instance, if I wanted to get rid of either one of these, I could do so, and this will automatically update. All right. When we go to the checkout, you will either have to log in, meaning you have an existing account, or you'll have to register for a new account. One or the other. All right? So, that's the login. This is the register. After creating an account, as it says, you can complete your order by filling out shipping and payment information. Notice, to keep things simple, it says we're running an amazing promotion. Everything's free if they enter the promotion code free. All right? So if you type in free there, there'll be no cost. After you order, you'll see a simple confirmation screen. Now, this is important because it gives you an order number, and you'll be able to go back afterwards and check your order based on that number. As it says here, in addition to customer pages, we'll also build an administrator section that will show a list of albums from which the administrator will have. These will be in a database. So the administrator will have the ability to add new albums, all right, there, edit existing albums, or delete existing albums. Now they talk about here what you need. I'm also going to make sure I've already downloaded this. I've got it someplace, and I'm going to give you a copy of that too. All right. Don't worry, because we've got more than these things that are right here. So where it says ASP.NET MVC3, we're going to be doing ASP.NET MVC5. So they go through and they expect that you've never created a project here before. All right. So they have you create an empty project, and we'll try to follow along with that. They want you to call it MVC Music Store. Well, I'm planning on creating this twice. Once on these tapes that I'm doing outside of the classroom, and once inside of the classroom. So I'm just going to call mine, instead of MVC Music Store, the one I do for these tapes here, I'm just going to call Music Store. So let me bring up, I'm playing around with some other stuff here. This is the shopping cart app that I was building for you, and this is where I was running into problems. And it was on this line right here. Don't know why, but I was. So I'm going to do a save all. I might come back to that. Not with you guys, but I might. All right, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do a file, new, project, in ASP.NET web application. Again, I'm just going to call it MusicStore, the one that I create and basically redo this in the classroom will be MVC MusicStore. So I also want to create a Git repository. I'm not going to add these application insights. All right, that just basically brings up a file that allows you to do some other stuff. I've never worked with it, so why would I, expect you to understand it? So I'm saving it to my desktop under MusicStore. Now, change authentication. I'll have just Windows authentication. You know what? Let's see if the author says anything. How about that? So I want to go back to here. No, that's not there. I've got it there too. You're going to get hard copies of all this stuff, so that isn't it either. There, we've got it. So it says this will create the project for us. And even though it's empty, it'll have some folders in there. They didn't say anything about authentication because the authentication was done differently at that time. All right, so let's just go in here. We will use, excuse me, we'll keep it at the default individual user account. So I'm going to click OK. We want this to be MVC, okay? In fact, let's just do an empty project with MVC. So MVC empty, all right? We're following what is shown on this handout. My hope is later that I'm going to be able to host this, but not to Azure, all right? And I'm going to click OK. And it's spinning around, creating some stuff for me, and as you'll see, with an empty project, I still get a bunch of stuff created. I still get an app data folder, an app start folder, a controllers folder, a models folder, and a views folder. In fact, the views folder has a web config in it. There is a global web config. There is the global ASPX, which has got our startup file. There are the references. And in app start, we've got a route config. But we don't have we don't have a content folder. We don't have the entity framework to my knowledge. All right, we don't have much of anything. So we'll add that stuff as we go along. All right, so I'm going to follow what they have in here, but I won't be doing it exactly the same. All right, because it's not the exact same program, etc. So, again, this is review, but let's quickly go over it. ASP.NET makes use of basic naming conventions for folder names. Our controllers, remember the controller is the traffic cop, so to speak. It is the conduit between the models and the views. So the controller starts by responding to input from the browser, typically a URL. It decides what to do with it. Typically, it's going to call some kind of a model. All right. And when the model returns information to the controller is going to figure out and return the correct response to the user. All right. So again, it's a conduit. The view is going to hold our user interface templates. So it's going to be basically what we return back to the user. The models hold and manipulate the data. Now that's a twofold type of thing. What that means, all right, what that means is that this models folder will hold both our database and our classes that manipulate the database to conform to our business rules. We'll have a content folder, all right, which will hold our images, our CSS, and any other static content, and our scripts folder to hold our JavaScript files, all right? As it says here, these folders are included even in an empty ASP.NET MVC application because the ASP.NET MVC framework by default uses a convention that's known as convention over configuration. So as it mentioned there, it makes some default assumptions. And it says that you're going to want to follow fairly, fairly strict conventions as far as how you name things. So as it says, controllers look for views in the views folder by default. Sticking with this convention, as mentioned here, reduces the amount of code you need to write. It also makes it easier for other developers to understand your project. And this will be explained later. So before I go on to part 2, which is controllers, I want to go back to my project. And you'll notice I don't have a content folder. All right. And I don't have a scripts folder. All right. So I'm going to go over here, right mouse click, and I'm going to go to add. And I'm going to go to that's interesting. I don't want to go to add. I want to go to manage NuGet packages. There we go. All right. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to check and let's see what's installed. ASP.NET MVC, Razor, ASP.NET web pages, some DOM stuff, some compiler stuff, and some infrastructure stuff. So I'm going to browse. I want to find, first of all, let's find Bootstrap. And we're gonna shoot our wad here, pardon my French. And what we're going to do is we're going to, because this is either going to be real good or it's going to be real not good. So I'm going to try to add the latest and greatest of everything. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put in Bootstrap. All right, and I'm going to actually look in here. There's version 4 beta 2, and I'm going to try to install that puppy. All right, and it says what it's installing a bunch of stuff here. And you'll notice I now have a scripts folder. It says your project has been configured to do TypeScript. Would you like to search for the TypeScript typings in NuGet? No, because I'm not going to do anything with TypeScript. But you'll notice I now have a content folder with all my Bootstrap stuff in it. I now have a scripts folder with all my jQuery and JavaScript stuff in it. All right. I want to do one last thing. I'm going to close this. I want to go, well, I'm going to leave that. But I'm going to go back to this right mouse click, and I'm going to choose Manage NuGet Packages one more time. And under Browse, in fact, under Install, just to be sure, I'm going to type in here Entity Framework. And what I'm hoping is there's nothing found. Good. So I'm going to go to Browse and Entity Framework. And I'm going to grab the latest and greatest, which is version 6.2, and I'm going to install that. And it tells me that it's going to install the Entity Framework 6.2.0. I'm going to click OK. It says there's a license here. I will accept it. And I don't know if anything magical happens over here. It gave me a ton of references. And it's showing you over here what's happening. And boom, I'm back. So what I want to do is finish this first iteration. But before that, I'm going over to Team Explorer here, which we haven't seen before. And this shows all the files that I have so far. And what I want to do is I want to come over here and I want to do number 1, created empty MVC 5 project. So that's the first thing I did. All right. Next, what else did we do? We added Bootstrap 4.0, which also added jQuery, JavaScript, TypeScript, and I don't know what else, so I'll say etc. Okay? All right. Next, we added the Entity Framework 6.2.0, I believe it was. All right. That's pretty much, I think, what we did. I could be skipping something. Let me go back to our handout here. And instead of being in part 2, let's go back to part 1 and make sure I didn't miss anything. So we created our new project, which was empty. Okay. And even though they didn't tell you to do that here, we also went over what these were. And by adding Bootstrap, I now have a content folder and a scripts folder. I think that's pretty much everything. Let me jump back one more time. So since we added Bootstrap, it gave us that. And I'm going to hit enter here. This also gave us the content and scripts folders. Okay, then we added the entity framework. So I created an empty MVC project called MusicStore. All right. Now, right now I want to commit all these. They're in that staging area, and there's 51 files. So all I have to do is click commit all, and it tells me there's nothing else ready to be staged. In other words, my first commit has been done. This is a 10-part project. I'm now done with part 1. I hope to commit after every stage. I hope this works. All right, so I'm going to come back in just a couple minutes, and when I come back, I'm going to go over part 2, where we will work with controllers. Again, this is very rudimentary. It's very intuitive, I think, and in many ways, it's very plodding in what a plodding. And what I mean there is it's slow to develop, but we'll get there. Stay with me.